being able to share those feelings helped me to feel good about going in to have surgery. And then when he visited me, I wasn't scared, like, oh, is he going to leave and be crying to my husband when we got to talk about it. So I had an experience. Actually, I was in Colorado Springs where my son came to the dentist with me. He was sick that day. It took me like 6 months to get the appointment. No one had told me about community care, but it was definitely after the VA Mission Act. My son was with me, 6 at the time. All they were doing was doing the foam thing to measure my mouth for a mouth guard. But I kept getting delayed and canceled. And so I finally went to the appointment, but I had my son and I was like, can he just sit here and watch a show on my phone in the corner? And you just do the foam really quick and then I can leave. And they were like, no, you're going to have to reschedule your appointment.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Hey, thanks for being with us for another episode of American Potential. Appreciate you joining us. First of all, watch us on YouTube. We have our own YouTube channel. Many people listen to the podcast on their podcast platform, and that's great if you're driving home and you're listening there. But if you want to actually watch it on your laptop or your television, you can watch it on YouTube. And it is, just type in American Potential. We have our own channel and all of our episodes are there. Now, I would not recommend watching it while you're driving, but I would recommend watching it if you're at home. It's a great opportunity to interact, see our guests and see what other people are saying about the show as well. So anyway, thanks for being with us. We talk a lot on this show about veterans and the Veterans Administration. And quite frankly, the way that the bureaucracy at the VA is put above and ahead of the care that is provided to veterans. And, for many veterans that are navigating the really complex landscape of the Veterans Affairs or the VA healthcare system, it can be overwhelming and it can be really discouraging. And we've told a lot of those stories on this podcast. Now, despite their service to the country and their sacrifice, a significant number of veterans face barriers in accessing the care they need and they deserve. Some of the challenges they're facing are long wait times. There's a lot of times there's limited access to specialized treatments. Appointments are often canceled, and sometimes they have to travel for hours to get to an appointment. And many times the facilities themselves are understaffed. Now, these challenges not only impact veterans' physical and mental well-being, but they also leave veterans feeling frustrated with a VA system that was set up to help them, and they're not getting that help. Well, today's guest is one of those veterans that, while serving overseas, was injured, but her injury was misdiagnosed. And that led to more issues. And she ended up having to go outside the VA system to not only get her injury repaired, but also seek the mental health care that she needed. So I want to welcome Army veteran Amanda Tallman to the show. Amanda, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
So you are an Army veteran. What made you decide to serve in the military? How did you pick the U.S. Army?
So I joined the Army in 2007 I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. I was having honestly a challenging time going to school. No one in my family had gone to college before, in my immediate family, more than like a semester. So they didn't really have a good idea of like what that looked like. So I went to college for one semester and I ended up failing out and moving to California for 6 months and then moved back to Detroit because I couldn't afford to live in California. And that whole adventure kind of left me like with this epiphany of like, what am I going to do the rest of my life? And I wanted to go to college, and the Army recruiter, they had mentioned they'd give me a bonus and I would be able to get my degree. So that was the first place I went to. And that was the last. I honestly signed up that day. And then I left after I did MEPS, all of the testing and everything. I left the following week.
Okay, great. And then where have you served? You served several locations, right? In the Army.
Yes. Yes, I went to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and then I was stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia. I deployed to Afghanistan and I served there for 15 months. And then I came back, did some more training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and then I got a Green to Gold scholarship. And I was actually in a small town in Nebraska, Chadron State College, did the ROTC program there. And then I commissioned into the Army. And then I actually came out to Phoenix, Arizona, where I worked as a military intelligence officer until I retired in 2018.
Wow. Okay, great. Tell us, talk about your accident and what happened.
Yeah, so I was a Mark 19 gunner when I was deployed in Afghanistan, and it's about a 77-pound weapon that shoots 40 mic rounds, grenade. It's like a grenade launcher. I mean, it is a grenade launcher. It's not like one. And I was mounting it. It's supposed to be a 2-man carry, and during those times, I think if I would have asked for someone to help me, they might have just there probably would have been a lot of judging. And so I would carry it every day. And I would just set it on the top of my Humvee, and then I'd kind of climb up and then pull it into the turret. Well, the turret is kind of like a circular shape. And I was probably 120 pounds. So 120
so wait a minute, you're 120
female.
pounds. You get 120 pounds and it's a 77-pound weapon, right?
Yes.
Okay,
So I'm
right.
hiking it into the mount. And one particular morning, it was super damp out, and they have like these rubber linings that go around the turret. So I normally use that to kind of hold my knees against the circular shape of the turret. And then I pick up the gun and kind of toss it into the mount as quickly as possible. This particular morning, the gun actually fell back on me and I fell on the metal hinge of the turret. So I would say the metal hinge is about a 1/2 inch wide, and the corners are very sharp. I don't think people were thinking someone would fall on them when they designed them. And that hinge actually cut me open close to my rectum. And that ended up turning into an abscess, and then that led to a fistula. But when I was diagnosed in Afghanistan, they said, oh, it's just a cut, like it's okay. And then when I finally got to Bagram a couple months later, they said, oh, it's just hemorrhoids, you're fine. And then I came back to the States, and I actually ended up having thyroid cancer. And so they were like, yeah, with thyroid cancer, you become hypothyroidism. Hypothyroidism slows everything down. You're probably going to have more hemorrhoids. You're going to have this, you're going to have that. And I was 21. So I trusted those doctors, and I was like, oh, I just have hemorrhoids. And I really wanted to go back to get my degree and become an officer. So I just kept pushing through and kept telling myself, like, don't be dramatic. A lot of the men that I worked with, I like pink. I'm pretty girly. Obviously I didn't wear that in in my uniform, but I have a very bubbly personality. And so I didn't want to be labeled as like this drama queen or whatever. So a lot of times I would just like pull up my bootstraps and drive on and keep going so that I wasn't labeled as that. And it's funny, hindsight is 2020. When my doctor just this last year said, Amanda, like, you've been through a lot. Like, it's okay to like feel that and like grieve that. Like, there was a lot of trauma that happened to that lower region of your body, and that's okay. And I think that was the first time I realized like, oh, I'm not being dramatic. Like this, like all these things that have happened have been really challenging and really difficult. But I think the military kind of shaped this idea in my mind that I had to be tough and I had to continue to drive on. And if I didn't, I would be considered weak or I wasn't a good soldier. And so I think it's been a long journey of, going through all of that and thinking in my mind, like, well, I just have to keep pushing. I just have to keep pushing. And then realizing like, oh, just pushing isn't actually going to make it better. I have to actually get care that I need.
Right. Right. So you were misdiagnosed, right? And so this happened in Afghanistan, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you were misdiagnosed. How long of a process was this? Like, you just went through it, but how long, over what length of time from the time of the accident until you actually figured out what it really was?
So it was March 2009, and it was not until September of 2014 that I was actually diagnosed. So it had been 5 years. It took 5 years. And some of that was because I thought that I was being dramatic. So I was afraid to share like, hey, I really think something's wrong. Like, hey, I really think, this is worse than like people had originally said and the doctors had said. So I think some of that was because of my own barrier that I had put up. But then I also, I had went to the VA in the Black Hills, actually, in Hot Springs, South Dakota. And the doctor there, he kind of fed into that, like being a drama queen. So I was like, a little like, oh gosh, like maybe I shouldn't share that. Like I'm just being dramatic. It's not that big of a deal kind of thing. So I didn't seek the care that I actually needed because I was afraid. There wasn't really anything wrong with me and that I was just being dramatic.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really press into that like I should have.
Yeah. So what would it have been different? And we're going to get into a lot more of this, but would it have been different if you didn't have to feel like you had to go to a VA facility? You could have just gone to, community care somewhere. I mean, do you think that might have made a difference for you?
I think it would have, honestly. I think for me, and I was just actually having this conversation. I got my license to be a therapist, and we were talking about, not everyone wants to see a veteran therapist if they're a veteran, because sometimes everyone has bias. We all know we have bias. And so it feels a little bit like, oh, well, I haven't done as much as other veterans. And so I don't want to go to this veteran group or this veteran thing because I don't know if I'm going to be judged or if I'm just going to be looked at like I'm a wimp. And I think for me, especially the VA in South Dakota, Hot Springs, South Dakota, I was always the youngest one there. I mean, every time there was always comments, like I always felt like just, I think awkward and it was uncomfortable. And so I think if I had a younger female provider that I related to or that I had sought out myself and like said, like, this is the one that I want to go to, I think I would have felt more comfortable with that. But at that point, I was in college and I had, I didn't have TRICARE. I was completely out of the military for those 3 years. I was in ROTC. And so I didn't really have a choice because I was living off of my GI Bill. And it wasn't a ton of money. It was, it was good, but it wasn't enough to pay for great healthcare.
Right. Well, and this would be a good point in this interview for me to point out that the Veterans Administration continually, despite the passage of the Missions Act, continually tries to redirect folks to VA facilities for healthcare. They have been ordered by the Congress of the United States to let veterans have care where they choose to have care, whether it's through community care facilities or through the VA, and give them that choice. But bureaucrats within the VA continue to try and force people into the VA system. And so I want people to understand who maybe haven't listened to one of the previous episodes we've done on this show about the VA healthcare system. That's an important part of this story, I think, as well. So, but let me ask you this. So the Phoenix VA has made a lot of news over the past many years. A big scandal at the Phoenix VA. You had to deal with that particular VA facility. What issues were you having with them and at that facility?
Yeah, I think for that facility specifically, so we all have our window of tolerance, and like we think about the word neuroception. So neuroception is just our brain taking in information all the time, and then subconsciously we're processing that information. Is this safe? Is this not safe? And our brains don't differentiate from an emotional threat or a physical threat. And for me, when I walk into the Phoenix VA, like, first of all, I know people who have received terrible care there. I know people who have received good care there, but I think about the people who have died by suicide in the parking lot. And I think about some of the other challenges people have faced. So already I'm on high alert going in there. So my window of tolerance is normally pretty big. I can hold space for a lot of challenging things. I've done it through my life. I have a lot of supports. So typically I can hold space for a lot of things without going outside where I get super angry and maybe yell, or I go into a space where I like just check out and zone out, or I like scroll on my phone. Like those are the two things kind of where I go to if I'm outside of my window of tolerance. And so setting this up, like even physically walking into the Phoenix VA, it's a scary and very vulnerable thing for me. And I've had several instances where I've been talked down to, or I feel as though, again, like I'm being dramatic, asking for the care that I deserve. And it has been, and like even right now, like I feel myself like starting to tear up because it makes me feel as though like I'm less than, and that I'm not valued as a human being, just like the basic human dignity of being a person. And that's been really challenging for me. And now I'm in the social work space, and I got my master's degree to be a social worker. And like part of our code of ethics is literally like dignity and respect of the person as a human being. And so I see that. And for me personally, I've chosen not to use the VA anymore. I tried several times, and I've tried to go back. And I've had a friend recently, she said, well, why don't you get on the board to try to make a difference? And there's like a community board where people can share their concerns. And I said, I do want to be a part of the solution. I do. And it is a very challenging thing. And when I talk about, like, I have 3 kids, I have a husband, I have my own health issues. I actually, I resigned from working with Concerned Veterans for America because of those health issues have kind of just taken a toll. And to take on something like that, I feel like it's a huge undertaking, and I would really have to be in the right headspace to be able to do that. But people know that I care, and they know that I'm advocating for change. But I'm doing it within the limits that I can do, because it's bureaucracy. Like, it's huge. Like, even me talking about these things, like, it's just one small piece. It's not the solution. And it's a very micro thing for me to share my story. Whereas like macro level, like we need change at the macro level with policy and things that can really help transform down to the micro level, instead of us trying to advocate and advocate and advocate and advocate. But those changes don't happen because it's such a huge system.
Right.
So it's frustrating. I think at the minimum, it's frustrating and challenging to even go to the Phoenix VA or be involved in it. I've been trying to get myself back out there to help, but I don't know if now is the right time. So that's why I'm here sharing my story.
Right. Right. Well, and there's obviously, that there are options. Community care is an option. I'm sure you know veterans, because I know many of them who don't know about that as even an option. They believe they have to go to the VA facility. In some cases, if they live in a rural area, that VA facility may be, hours and hours away. You, in some ways, at least, were fortunate to know that you could go outside of that VA system, right? Think of all the veterans who don't know that.
Absolutely. I will say, though, I'm not using community care. I'm using TRICARE because I retired. I was able to use TRICARE. And so when I did use community care, unfortunately, it took them a really long time to pay their bills. And that created a lot of tension between the doctor and the financial situation. And that caused a lot of undue stress that I did not need in my life. And so I would rather pay my out-of-pocket maximum deductible per year than have to deal with the uncertainty of, is the VA going to pay my bill? Am I going to be able to see my provider?
Right.
Is that going to, create some tension there? I don't want to deal with that. So I've completely switched to just using TRICARE.
Yeah. But there are veterans who don't understand that they can go outside of that VA system at all. I mean,
100%. 100%. Yeah.
And the VA is encouraging them to stay in the system because the VA, the Veterans Administration, has a bias towards having veterans stay in that system.
Yes. And Secretary McDonough, the Hispanic Caucus hosted him out here in Phoenix last year. And I asked him the question about the long wait times with mental health. And his answer was, well, there's long wait times everywhere. And as I was a therapist before here in the Phoenix local community. And it's one thing to have like long wait times at the Phoenix VA or even some of the other clinics that they had there. I mean, it was over 90 days. And you could just go down the list of therapists in our area and someone is going to have an opening like before 90 days. There are providers that have openings before 90 days. And so the answer, it wasn't a great answer for me. No. It's not the truth, and veterans should, especially mental health, we should be able to get the care that we deserve.
And that's such a bureaucratic answer. It should anger every taxpayer who pays his salary, that his answer is, well, there are just waits everywhere. Well, that's why we need free market competition in the healthcare sector. It's certainly why we need it with veterans and veterans healthcare, is because if there were free market alternatives out there, there wouldn't be a wait everywhere. That would not be an acceptable answer to just say, well, there's a wait everywhere. How about you do the job we pay you to do, which is to reduce the wait, not make excuses for why there is a wait. That's infuriating, quite honestly, Amanda, to me. That's what he said.
It is.
So you didn't want the VA to do the repair to your colon, so you went outside the VA. So talk about some of the differences in your care between what you got and what you would have had inside the VA.
Yes. So this almost brings me to tears every time. So we went with Mayo Clinic, and not every hospital is as amazing as Mayo Clinic. I first want to preface that, but being able to have the choice to choose was, first of all, super healing for me. Like, we talk about mental health, we talk about all these challenges, and I've been going to therapy and getting all this support. But what healed me, years of challenges healed in this experience of going to Mayo Clinic. So about a week before my surgery, I have a 4-year-old, a 9-year-old, and my 14-year-old just turned 15. So she's 15 now, but she was 14 last year when all my surgery stuff was happening. And I was able to take them to the hospital. First of all, it was like 8 p.m. on like a Saturday night. And I walked in and I said, hey, like my kids are just nervous about me going to have surgery and they just want to see where I'm going to be at. And they were like, oh, yeah, absolutely. Come on in.
Mm.
Like that welcoming.
Sure.
No one has even welcomed me like that at the VA, let alone welcoming my kids to come just explore the facility because they're anxious about my surgery. Then they gave me this book called Your Guide to the Hospital. And it was for my kids. For me going into the hospital, they gave this book to my kids. And one of and we're not even talking about my care yet. We're just talking about the support that they gave to my children. But one of the pictures they ask is, today I get to see my son put mom, circle how you feel before you're seeing your family member. So my son circled a kind of a scared face. He circled a face that looked shocked. He circled a sad face, and he circled a happy face. So he had a lot of mixed emotions going into that. And then he drew this picture of draw a picture or write about that feeling. All he did was scribble circles because he feels very confused. I am just so grateful that they gave him this book because I was able to talk to my son about those feelings. And after he saw me, he circled a bunch of pictures as well. So after seeing your family member, how did you feel? Worried. He circled like a worried face, a scared face, a happy face, and an excited face. And then he kind of drew some more scribbles about what that felt like. And that alone, I think, was like, I would choose that place. I mean, maybe I would choose to go there over anything because of the support, the wraparound support for my family, because my son being able to share those feelings helped me to feel good about going in to have surgery. And then when he visited me, I wasn't scared, like, oh, is he going to leave and be crying to my husband when we got to talk about it. So I had an experience. Actually, I was in Colorado Springs where my son came to the dentist with me. He was sick that day. It took me like 6 months to get the appointment. No one had told me about community care, but it was definitely after the VA Mission Act. My son was with me, 6 at the time. All they were doing was doing the foam thing to measure my mouth for a mouth guard. But I kept getting delayed and canceled. And so I finally went to the appointment, but I had my son and I was like, can he just sit here and watch, a show on my phone in the corner? Like, and you just do the foam really quick and then I can leave. And they were like, no, you're going to have to reschedule your appointment. And I was in tears. I was so upset because it took me so long to get to the appointment and I couldn't take him to school because he was sick. He didn't feel well. And maybe I shouldn't have brought him there, but it took me so long to get the appointment. I just needed my mouth guard because I was grinding my teeth down. And this amazing female veteran said, I'll watch your son while you go do this. And she was a stranger. I shouldn't have had to put my faith in a stranger to watch my son for 10 minutes, so that I could get this foam put in my mouth and measured so that then I can get my mouth guard to protect my teeth, especially and I've had cancer. So I had radiation and it's just caused a lot of problems. And so I really needed the mouth guard. And I had to put my trust in this female veteran that I didn't even know to sit there with my son for 10 minutes. And she did, and it was fine and it all worked out. But the stress of that event was overwhelming, absolutely overwhelming. So when I say this surgery with the Mayo Clinic was healing, it's because of all those little things that happen with the VA. The VA, they're not bring your kids in. They're not kid friendly. It's not that kind of hospital. Right. And I've never felt even when my husband was there, I felt oh gosh, how long are you going to be able to be here before people start getting upset or say something? Or they'll be asking my husband, thinking he's the veteran. And I'm oh no, I'm the veteran. And just because I'm the female and he's the male. And so, it had just created a lot of tension. So that's one of the main things that happened with Mayo Clinic. But then like the wraparound care, and for my doctor to tell me like, you're not being dramatic, like it was a relief, because I had felt like that through my experience, even in the military, which translated to the VA, which translated to my care, from South Dakota down to Phoenix, Colorado. I had a lot of different experiences. And even in Colorado, when I was pregnant with my daughter, I literally had to fight for them to believe me that I was pregnant. I had taken an early urine test, and my I had 2 miscarriages before, and I was high risk because I had an ostomy bag and I had previous thyroid cancer, and my medicine would sometimes I would go hypothyroidism, especially as my hormones changed as I got pregnant, and that had caused some miscarriages and a ton of problems. And so I knew I needed a high risk doctor. So I go in, they do the urine test. They're like, no, you're not pregnant. And I'm like, I'm telling you I'm pregnant. Can you please do the blood work to see my HCG levels? And I'm crying, begging them, like, I don't want to have another miscarriage. This is very traumatic for me. Like, please, will you just do your job? And finally, I talked to a patient advocate. I talked to all these other people. They finally did the blood test, and it was, several hours later. I'm still at the clinic. They finally gave me a referral to a high risk OB/GYN, and I was able to get the care that I needed. But like, had I not actually fought and begged for them to do their job, I could have had another miscarriage. And I don't think they realized like how important that moment was for me. And had they just said like, yes, let's do a blood test, like it wouldn't have been that difficult. But because there's all of the bureaucratic whatever, they're like, no, you had a urine test, you have to come back next week. And then if it's still not positive, then you'll have to come back the following week. And I'm like, you don't understand, like the 2 weeks that it could take for me to have a positive urine test is the 2 weeks I could miscarry and I won't have this baby. And I think about my daughter and like how much she means to me in my life. And I don't know what I would have done if I would have miscarried her.
Right.
After that, I ended up having to have a hysterectomy, and I had like a lot of health problems. And I look back at that moment, and it was like, could you just show a little bit of compassion? Like, just treat me with dignity as a person, instead of making me feel like I'm being dramatic for asking to have a blood test instead of a urine test. Any other, like, and I didn't have a choice. I couldn't go to another hospital to get the blood test. If I was in Arizona, I actually could have. Arizona's like the only state where you can pay for a blood test on your own, but I was in Colorado. And so it was really, really frustrating. So being able to choose to go to Mayo Clinic, and then having doctors that were so supportive and so understanding, I think it helped my body to stay in a place where it could heal, because I wasn't under so much stress from just going to the doctors.
Right.
And I ended up having, I still had complications, and I ended up after my last surgery, I ended up in the hospital for about a week because I was having like a lot of problems and they didn't know what was going on. And every day my doctor came in and he said, we're going to figure out what's going on, and I'm here to support you. And we have a whole team of doctors here to support you.
Yeah.
And everything that I asked or I requested, they listened to me. And I know maybe not every hospital is like that, but even when I was like, oh, I don't feel like this is right, I felt like I could advocate for myself and that they would listen. And that's just an experience. Like, I'm telling you, I've never experienced that from the VA ever. Like I
Right.
have not. And so it was a very healing thing for me to feel like,
Right.
oh, I can express how I'm feeling about my medical stuff, and they're going to help me and guide me and not make me feel like I'm being dramatic.
Right. Well, and the difference there is that the Mayo Clinic, you could choose to go there or you could choose to go somewhere else. But the VA system looked at it as you didn't have a choice. You had to go there.
Exactly.
And that's the difference. I mean, that is always the difference in the level of service. I would say that's the difference in education. When you have a closed system in K through 12 education, where your only choice is to go to the public school, is going to be different than if you have a system where you can choose to go other places. It's going to be the same at a grocery store. It's going to be the same at a gas station, a car dealership, a healthcare facility. I mean, competition is what drives that. The Mayo Clinic is one of the best medical facilities in the United States, if not in the world, But they're that because they focus on customer care and they want you to leave with a good experience. The VA doesn't have that same benefit. All they have to do is look at how many numbers they serve or metrics, or that they don't look at you necessarily as a human being who has desires, needs. And, in healthcare, a person knows their own body better sometimes than the doctor. And if you can't find a doctor who will listen to you and say, this is what I think it is, then that's a problem. And so that's the basic problem with the VA healthcare system being so closed off. But to me, ultimately, the difference is you can choose to go to a place, or as the VA, they would want to have a closed system where you can't choose to go anywhere else. And so that's the difference in your care. Now, Amanda, at one point you needed therapy, but you didn't get it through the VA. How were you able to get the help that you needed there?
Yeah, I actually went through the Wounded Warrior Project. So they had a program. I was able to receive 12 sessions, and I had some specifics that I wanted from a therapist, a female therapist. I wanted her to be a person who would incorporate my faith into my therapy, and some other things like that. And the Wounded Warrior Project was like, absolutely, we can help you. And they helped me through they connected me to a different resource that helped me actually get the person that I wanted, that I felt the most connection with, which is huge when you're talking, part of when I went through school and learned to be a therapist, part of, the recovery is the therapeutic relationship. It's huge. It plays a huge role, over 50% of your healing process. And so to be able to choose and say like, hey, these are the attributes that I want, that was amazing. Versus the person that I had been given for the VA, they were like, okay, this is who you have. And I was like, well, I don't know if this is really working. And then again, I felt like, oh, well, I'm just being dramatic. This is who they've given me. I need to just suck it up and this is it. But it felt, very like I needed to change myself to fit into their model, versus like the Wounded Warrior Project going above and beyond to help me find the therapist that I wanted.
Right. Now, you decided to become a therapist yourself, and you had the opportunity to intern at the VA. Tell us what happened there.
Yes. Man, the first minute I was sitting in the office, again, like it was that neuroception. Like I'm taking in information and I start to feel my heart racing, and I'm like, okay, calm down. Like this could be a really good experience. I can make this work. Like this can rewrite the story, is what I told myself. And then we go to make copies of my paperwork and nothing was working. Like we were in one office and the guy's like, nope, this printer's not working. Oh, the system must be down. And I was like, oh, does this happen a lot? And he's like, well, not this bad, like not where it's. So then we went to another building. So 3 different places we went and it was not working at all. And so my heart rate, it was like notifying me on my watch, like, hey, your heart rate is high. And I'm like, oh no, this is not good. And I realized like I'm not going to be able to be myself because I'm going to be on edge. And this is a learning experience. I'm supposed to be able to be curious, be in my prefrontal cortex, thinking, learning, developing myself. And this is not the environment that I can do that because of all of these things going on, and realizing it was not going to be the experience that I needed. And so I ended up that day, I found it was like the last day. I was so grateful. My school worked with me. I found another internship, and I switched the very next day. And it was like I said, the last day to do that. And I didn't end up going with the VA. And I thought in my mind, like, oh, I can make a difference. But even from that brief time, I realized, like, it's such a machine, like, it's so big that just by, putting one little thing in the machine to try to change it, it doesn't change the whole system. I might change interactions, like micro interactions with people and individuals. But at what cost? And is my mental health worth doing that? And it wasn't, not for my family, not for myself. And so I decided that wasn't the best fit for me.
Right. Well, listen, Amanda, thank you for sharing your story. How's your health? Are you doing better now? Obviously got the care you needed, I think. So doing better?
Yes, I am in physical therapy, taking it day by day. I'm struggling with some incontinence. And so just trying to take it day by day and see what happens.
Good. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that you're doing better and that you got care that you needed. And again, we have to tell this story because there's lots of veterans who didn't get the care that they deserve. You had to fight and battle to get it, but thank you for being with us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, Amanda. All right. Well, listen, this is one of those examples, right? We've talked about this on this podcast so often. Competition makes things better for everyone. And I mentioned it earlier in this episode, whether it's buying a car, whether it's shopping for gas, whether it's shopping for groceries or getting your health care or your education, competition is what makes it work. The VA, the Veterans Administration, unfortunately is very resistant to that change. They do not want veterans to have access to quality health care outside of the Veterans Administration. And so they try to force you to stay into that system. And that is not what Congress intended. In fact, it's directly contradicts what Congress ordered them to do through the Mission Act, which is to provide care to veterans, whether it's at community facilities or outside of the VA or at the VA. And so we have to continue to tell these stories like Amanda's so that we can continue to put pressure on government to make things better for veterans so that our veterans get the quality health care that they deserve. Thank you for listening to this episode. Our veterans have fought to defend our liberty and freedom, and we have to stand up with them when they have issues like this. We have to stand and fight against government's policies, bad policies by our government, by the Biden administration, particularly here, and allow them to have better health care. So thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.